Good afternoon. May we request everyone to please rise for our national anthem. Take our seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, friends, fellows, and guests, partners of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, welcome to the inaugural Paderanga-Varela Memorial Lecture. I will be acting as your MC. My name is Rick Balatbat. So, just to give you a flow of today's events, since I know the program is so hard to read, so I will just let you know how the program flow will go. So first, we'll have opening remarks from the President of the Foundation, followed by the lecture itself, which will be moderated by Dean Mendoza. And the main event, of course, our speaker is Dr. Paqueo, followed by several reactors. And afterwards, we will open it to everyone else to ask and comment or react. And it will be closed by the chairman of the Foundation. So before I call on our president, I would just like to give you a little background. Now, Toti Chiquiamco is not only president of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, he is also the president of a budding internet technology firm, MRM Technologies, said to be the next Zerpas, or after Zeller. So, Toti Chiquiamco has been an inspiration to most of us here in the Foundation, if not all of us. His love for country is unparalleled, as well as he gives inspiration for would-be entrepreneurs that it's never too late. You see, Toti entered in the internet business well past Mark Zuckerberg's time. But anyway, he's here. So I would like to call our president, Toti Chiquiamco, to give us the opening remarks.
Thank you, Rick. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Dr. Paqueo, Dr. Manis Guerra, Professor Nieves Conquisor, I think Attorney Raul Angeles, Assistant Secretary Alex Avila of the Department of Labor and Employment, friends, distinguished guests of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, ladies and gentlemen. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagdalo dito sa Paderanga-Varela Memorial Lecture ng Foundation for Economic Freedom sa ika-20 anibersaryo nito. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending the Paderanga-Varela Memorial Lecture of the Foundation for Economic Freedom on the occasion of its 20th anniversary. Why this memorial lecture? Firstly, we're holding it to honor two late co-founders of the Foundation for Economic Freedom who recently passed away. Dr. Cayetano Paderanga Jr., or Don Dot, as we fondly know him, the former Socio-economic Planning Secretary who passed away due to a heart ailment, and Francis Varela, former investment banker and Undersecretary for Education, who died suddenly in a tragic motorcycle accident. Secondly, we wanted to highlight an important and relevant topic today, that of the plight of temporary contractual employees and the populist demand to end so-called ENDO, or the phenomenon of terminating workers before they enjoy security of tenure of 6 months. We wanted a discussion rooted in evidence and research, and we are very happy that one of our fellows, who is an expert on the subject, Dr. Vicente Paqueo, agreed to give this memorial lecture. Before I give the floor to an FEF fellow and now Dean of Ateneo School of Government, Dr. Ron Mendoza, who will be moderating the discussion, allow me to briefly describe FEF for those who don't know it. The FEF is not a think tank. Although a number of its fellows are distinguished members of the academe and are thought leaders of this country, FEF is an advocacy organization. This means that FEF puts forth reform proposals that we believe is good for the country and zealously advocates for them. We aren't armchair economists, but activists who believe that even incremental, marginal changes for the better will have a substantial positive effect in the long run. However, our advocacies are always rooted in evidence. We aren't ideologues. Neither are we, as critics allege, market fundamentalists. I believe most of the fellows are institutionalists. That is, they believe that good institutions are critical to make markets work best. Thus, good governance is one of our advocacies. We're also not limited to opposing populist and protectionist policies. We've partnered with various institutions to advance our vision for the country and to promote property rights. For example, we have partnered with the Foundation for Philippine Islam and Democracy and the World Bank for a series of seminars that provided inputs to the Bangsamoro Development Plan. We have partnered with the Asia Foundation, the USID, and presently the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Australian Embassy to promote the issuance of residential free patents in cooperation with local government units. Also, not many people know this, but at least 2/3 of all public schools have no titles. With assistance from DFAT, we work with the DepEd and the DNR for the issuance of the implementing rules and regulations that made it easier for public schools to obtain titles. Many of our fellows have served government in various capacities across the political spectrum. These political differences, however, have not prevented us from advocating principles of economic freedom and good governance that unite us. We hope that you will learn from this lecture. Dr. Paqueo and Dr. Orbeta, who did the study on which this lecture is based, are highly respected economists who did their study with scientific rigor. We will be filming this lecture and posting it on YouTube and on our website, fef.org.ph. And I think we're now on Facebook Live. We hope this can be the start of thought-provoking lectures on the Philippine economy, much similar to the renowned TED Talks on the internet. We'll be giving away data sticks with a study and the PowerPoint plus other materials related to the labor issue. Enjoy the lectures and good afternoon to you all.
Thank you, Tony, for the opening remarks. Now, before we call the moderator of today's event, I'd like to plug, Tony's also selling his books over there on the right. Wonderful books, a collection of all his columns in the business world. And also Dr. Jerry Sica and, and Cesar Virata, our honorary chairman. So, I would love to be the moderator for today's session, but they found someone better, which is good. So, our moderator is currently the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government. Previously, he was Executive Director of the AIM Rizalino Navarro Policy Center, a post that was previously occupied by Chief Justice Lourdes Sereno. And he was also concurrent at that time Associate Professor of Economics at the Asian Institute of Management. He is a graduate of the Ateneo and pursued his master's and doctoral studies in economics at Fordham University. And he was also able to secure a master's in public administration at Harvard University. So without further ado, I'd like to call our moderator for today's session, a good friend of ours, Dean Ron Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Rick. Very kind introduction. I came all the way from the great state of Marikina to moderate today's discussion. I no longer work in Makati, but I was very happy to be invited to moderate the presentation of a good friend of mine, Dr. Vic Paqueo. One of the first researchers I actually connected with when I repatriated in the Philippines in 2011. So Vic and Babes have been very kind, very supportive co-researchers on many things that we were trying to develop, right? Let me first introduce Vic, turn over the microphone to him, and then introduce each of the reactors after Vic makes his presentation. So Dr. Vic Paqueo is a visiting research fellow at the Philippine Institute of Development Studies. He has spent most of his professional working life for the World Bank in Washington, D.C. from 1985 until his retirement in 2008. He was mainly an economist in different sectors within the World Bank, which includes the social protection sector, education sector, human development, population and human resource operations, among others. So that's almost all the sectors there. He has worked in a variety of countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Turkey, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Costa Rica. In 1983, he was one of the outstanding young scientists of the country as awarded by the National Academy for Science and Technology. He graduated cum laude in AP Economics from the University of the Philippines and later on obtained his PhD in Economics from UPSC. Without further ado, I turn over the mic to Dr. Vic Paqueo.
Thank you very much, Ron, and thank you also to FEF for inviting me to give this Paderanga-Varela Memorial Lecture. I think this is the first, so it's indeed an honor. I changed the question a little bit for today. The question is, would ending ENDO and outlawing other temporary employment contracts contribute to inclusive economic growth? So I broadened the topic a little bit. I want to do three things in this lecture. To broaden and share with you our perspectives on the anti-contractualization issue, first. Second, to provide information about the potential consequences for inclusive growth of ending ENDO and of curtailing other temporary employment contracts, which I would in short call TECs. Third, to articulate the need to ensure that the anti-contractualization agenda does not undercut achievement of inclusive growth. Next, please. Okay, so let me begin with the economic context. I think there is no need for me to tell you that the Philippines is no longer the sick man of Asia. Nonetheless, we are not satisfied because progress in poverty and inequality reduction has been slow. This table basically gives you, many of you know this already, the trends in poverty rate, the unemployment rate, and the underemployment rate. Basically, the story is the persistence of high poverty, unemployment, and underemployment rate. But let me call attention to a few observations. Table 1 first. Okay, this I think is a new table. that we produced out of the labor force survey data, which shows that the share of employment, total employment accounted for by temporary work has risen from about 18% in 2000 to 24% in 2014. So maybe that's what's fueling the insecurity. But note also that the regular jobs actually account for the predominant share of about 74% to about 70% in 2014. Next, please. This table basically is about the trends in the average daily earnings of wage and salary workers in 26 crisis. So what you'll notice here is that the average wage earnings is lower in 2014 compared to 2001 for all for regular employees and for temporary employees. But note, however, that after declining for the first decade of this century, it has been declining. During the time of President Aquino, it actually seemed to have moved up. There's some kind of an increase there in the average daily earnings of wage and salary workers. Next, please. Now, in regard to the political context, the temporary employment contracts are being portrayed as a cause of workers' hardships and exploitation. And this demonization, and I deliberately call it demonization, as you will see later, of techs and the capitalists, basically is, in my view, one of the causes for the populist backlash against techs. And this backlash essentially generated intense political demands to end contractualization. And these demands range from ending ENDO practices to outlawing all forms of techs. So under intense pressure, you remember all the presidential candidates in the last election committed themselves to end labor contractualization, let's say, immediately. And President Duterte is now under pressure to deliver on his commitment. Now, for purposes of our discussion this afternoon, I define temporary employment contracts, or TECs, in terms of the labor code classification as consisting of casual employees and probationary employees. I'm not going to read the definition there. You could just go over them yourselves. There are two fundamental reasons why workers want to be regularized. First, regular workers are entitled to certain benefits that temporary employees are not. Second, regular workers can be dismissed only for lawful or authorized causes and with observance of due process. This means, in practice, it is very difficult and costly for firms or employers to dismiss regular workers. So this is an issue of security of tenure. As part of the Philippine employment protection laws, employers must, and the acronym that I will use and is being used for this employment protection laws or legislation is EPL. Employers must offer casual and other temporary, other temps, permanent employment 6 months after start of their engagement. Otherwise, the employers must lay them off. This is the so-called regularization law or rule. Some employers resort to ENDO to avoid adverse consequences of this regularization rule on their businesses. ENDO has been defined already by Toti. I just add that ENDO is deemed illegal. Now, temps can be legally hired directly by principals or through manpower service contractors or agencies. In case of the latter, workers are allowed to work for the principals as temps over and over without having to regularize them, but certain conditions must be met. And this is the so-called, there should be no contracting with labor-only agencies. Next, please. This table shows, next please. This table shows a characterization by the World Bank of the labor market. Essentially, it shows you that the labor market, comparatively speaking, is the labor cost is high, the labor market is inflexible, and comparatively inefficient. And this is due to the employment protection legislation. If you look at, there are several, the second column is basically the labor market efficiency score of countries. The third column is the ranking in labor market efficiency out of 144 countries. And then the next three columns are selected components of this labor market efficiency score, which consists of hiring and firing, scoring hiring and firing practices, scoring redundancy costs in wage and salary, and an index of flexibility in wage determination. The last column, which I think many of you are interested in, is the ratio of the minimum wage to the average value added per worker. So what you will find is that essentially the Philippines is, if you look at the third column, highlighted in red, there is 91. So it ranks 91 out of 144 countries. So that means that essentially we are above, way above the average. One way of interpreting that is that the key message of this table is that the Philippines is already way above international EPL, or employment protection legislation practices, relative to other countries and relative to what it can afford. Next. For government and voters to have a more informed responses to the anti-contractualization demand, it is critical to have a good understanding of, or at least a reasonable understanding of, the economic value of temporary employment contracts. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following points. First, TECs are mechanisms for efficiently adjusting labor use to changing demands due to economic cycles and shocks. This is the buffer stock hypothesis. Seasonal business activities, project-based activities. Second, TECs allow employers to avoid underutilized or unproductive employees during low demand periods and facilitates rapid increase in available workers during peak demand. It allows, or they allow, timely reallocation of labor from low productivity sector during low demand periods to other sectors with higher productivity during that same period. Third, according to the screening or filter hypothesis, techs are used as devices for ensuring quality worker-job matches. You see, information by credentials and paper and pencil tests are really not very reliable, and so they pose risks to employers. The risk of mismatches can be high, and getting stuck with them can be costly, depending on the complexity and difficulty of the job, as well as the difficulty of dismissing people when market conditions have changed, or when the matching is it's not very good. In other words, you might have hired somebody that you thought was it's very good, but turns out to be not well fitted with the jobs for which he was hired. Now, techs provide a stepping stone or pathway to workers with poor credentials to become regular employees. So this is, in other words, good for inclusivity. This view about techs as screening or filter hypothesis, and the idea implication that in effect techs also provide a stepping stone or pathway for workers with poor credentials, certain implications in terms of exclusiveness of the exclusivity that curtailing or banning temporary employment contracts. So text allows timely allocation, finally, timely reallocation of labor to best fit use of human resources. They minimize so-called lock-in effects. The following, after looking at the literature and the analytics, the following are expected effects of curtailing techs. 1, decline in employment rate. 2, increased unemployment rate. 3, reduced transition rate from temporary to permanent employment. And 4, less opportunities for disadvantaged or vulnerable workers to become permanent employees. Let us now look at some evidence, starting with Europe's experience with techs. Europe has had highly restrictive employment protection legislation, or EPL, that resulted in what was known then as Eurosclerosis, or jobless economic growth. European countries started in the late 1970s the tech reform process to develop more flexible labor markets. Most of them completed the process in 1997. The reform led to a rise in the share of temporary workers in Europe, which rose from less than 6% in 1983 to nearly 15% in 2007. The point that I want to make here is that liberalization of temporary employment contracts is now seen as a major instrument for bringing down high unemployment rates. Next, please. So table 5 is essentially generalized least squares analysis of a panel of data of the European countries. And essentially, the horizontal line there that's highlighted basically shows that the higher the protection, the employment protection laws, the more restrictive they are on temporary contracts and even regular contracts, the higher the unemployment rate. There are other interesting things in this regression analysis, but I won't touch them because I only have a few minutes left. By the way, can you tell me when I'm halfway? Okay, let us now also look at more closely the experience of temps in the Philippines. What do the Philippine data suggest about Indo employees' experience? Well, to summarize, the great majority of Indo workers appear satisfied with their jobs. We'll show that in a while. They appear to receive minimum wages, social insurance, and other benefits. There is, however, still room for improving the work conditions of Indo workers, referring to essentially the security of tenure. Now let me, before proceeding, let me just make a caveat here that essentially this data is not representative of the country or even of the zone, but that is the best available data that we can get to answer our questions. So, Table 6, next please. There it is. It shows that they were asked about 100, close to 100 or a little bit more of the workers were asked. These are Indo workers from surveyed contractors and principals in Region 11, 10, and Region 4A and NCR. So they were asked, how satisfied are you with your current job? And 94 or 95% says they were satisfied. Now, they were then asked, are the following Social Security and welfare benefits deducted? Deducted from your monthly salary, which means that they are covered. And it's not that bad, actually. SSS, 26%, PhilHealth, 95%, Pag-ibig, 93%. And minimum wage, are you entitled to the following rights and privileges? Minimum wage, 95%. Are paid at least the minimum wage. Overtime pay, a high percentage also get overtime pay, as well as 13-month pay. Now, the rest, from the 13-month pay down, you'll see that these are many, the security of tenure, retirement benefits, etc. It's kind of low. So improvement could be made there. Now, we also find, using the Philippine Labor Force Survey data, the following facts. The transition rate, next please. The transition rate of workers from temporary to permanent employment is substantial. In the Philippines, 40 to 55% of temporary workers during the period 2003 to 2010, that's the period of transition from temporary to permanent employment status after a few quarters. So this is from the panel data. Now to compare, temps in 1996 in Europe transitioning to permanent jobs 1 year after or 1 year later ranges from 56% in UK to 20.8% in France. So I think France is the low end of the curve, because I think that France is more restrictive in its labor protection laws compared to England. Next. Okay. This slide shows the percentage of temporary workers becoming regulars slightly rising after a given number of quarters working as temps. The following additional observations can be drawn from the Philippine Labor Force Survey panel data that we constructed. More than 50% of the first-time temps do not make it to regular job and had to be fired after 2 quarters of work as temps. There is heterogeneity, or a lot of differences, in the chances and pace of transition of temps to permanent worker status depending on their credentials and background. Third, workers who fail to transition to regular jobs after 6 months of temp work come from disadvantaged groups with poor credentials. These groups include the young, women, and workers without high school diploma and others. The next few slides support what we have just mentioned. Next, yeah, okay. This shows you the differential between male and female in terms of the probability becoming permanent by number of quarters. Next, please. A similar graph, but relates to the differences in the level of education, showing that those with only some high school or less are actually lagging behind those that have high school graduates and better. Next. Yes. Okay, no, sorry. So this one shows you that the transition probability is better among employees in the service sector. Next. So what are the implications of those differences in temps' ability to transition to regular jobs? First, the current regularization rule is an inflexible one-size-fits-all rule. It does not allow for differences in people's abilities, the complexity / difficulty of jobs, and the firm's risk profile. The 6-month period appears too short for workers with credentials to learn on the job and for a firm to see their hidden character and competencies that still has to be discovered by employers. The current rule makes it more difficult and costly for disadvantaged workers to be regular. This finding suggests that allowing more flexibility in the regularization rule could be more inclusive and efficient. In other words, more welfare enhancing. So we now go to the practical question: how will government end ENDO? Okay, the initial plan announced by Dolly, the Secretary of Dolly, basically says the President's vow is limited only to ending ENDO. They aim for a 50% reduction of ENDO in the first semester of 2017, sorry. And 100% by the end of 2017. That was my understanding, the announcement. The plan is limited to getting employers to it's limited to getting employers to strictly comply with current regulations. No new legislation regulating text. In other words, it's not going, at this time anyway, for the more extreme demands of the left and the NDF to abolish or to outlaw or at least severely curtail the other forms of temporary employment contracts. But the labor code, and this is the thing that I like, is that the labor code would be reviewed, findings of which would then be the basis for its modernization. Next, please. Okay, other than the initial plan, the question is, how else can ENDO be ended without undercutting government employment law? That's really the hard question. So, because I think there was a sense, even within Loli, that just pushing, threatening, making intensive inspection of employers' practices, that it could actually significantly hurt employment. So I think BPI came up with a proposed so-called win-win solution. The win-win solution essentially would allow a firm to hire the services of workers without the obligation of regularizing or firing them after 6 months of work, provided they are supplied by qualified manpower service agencies or contractors, provided further that those workers are employed as regular employees of above contractors, and said workers receive mandated benefits. Okay, so that's my understanding of the BPI proposal. Next. Oh. No, wala na. I think I skipped some. Can you backtrack a little bit? I think yeah. So the next question is, why do some employers, that was the, okay. So many sort of ask the question, why do some employers resort to ENDO practices? I think this is very important to have an understanding of this question. Because that would allow you to have a sense of what would be sustainable points at which you can reduce, ENDO practices. Essentially, what this says is that ENDO is a mechanism for coping with the business costs and difficulties associated with labor regulations. And for many employers, their decision to regularize a worker or practice ENDO depends on their calculation of the cost and benefits from ENDO practices for avoiding complying with the current regulations. So essentially the diagram there shows that the various employment protection laws regarding salary benefits, dismissal cost, and the risk and penalty of being caught for non-compliance basically underpins the expected cost avoided due to ENDO and the expected cost of non-compliance with the law. That savings, the magnitude of the savings from ENDO adoption creates the incentive for ENDO practice. In other words, these ENDO practices have underlying incentives. So that incentive will have to be reduced, or if not eliminated, in order to completely eliminate the tendency of some employers to resort to ENDO practices. Now, next please. No. Okay. So this expands that, essentially, the other. So, but the concern here is that the plan of the that was announced by ENDO essentially would lead to job losses that would undercut achievement of employment target, as I already mentioned earlier. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. So, in conclusion, government needs to carefully weigh the effects of ENDO and of curtailing other forms of temporary employment contracts. Specifically, there is a need for immediately ENDO, the need for immediately ending ENDO is overblown, in our view, given the available information that we have about the experience of ENDO workers. Especially when you compare it with the needs of the more numerous informal, low productivity workers that have more urgent needs requiring government support. Second, ENDO and other techs play valuable roles in keeping the Philippine economy efficient, competitive, and inclusive. Third, ending ENDO would adversely affect inclusive economic growth, but that depends on the aggressiveness and nature of the government response to the anti-contractualization demand. This adverse impact would be intensified by imposition of more restrictions on other forms of temporary employment contracts and by other policies being pushed by President Duterte's militant allies. For example, imposing hefty increases in legal minimum wages and other more aggressive actions of militants. Next, please. The anti-contractualization agenda, driven by the administration's militant allies, is anachronistic. Curtailment of techs run counter to the lessons of Europe, re-liberalization of EPLs as a way to overcome the phenomenon of growth with little job creation, and run counter to what the Philippines needs to do to prepare for the onslaught of job destruction and creation in the wake of the coming labor-saving, labor-displacing fourth industrial revolution. What is needed looking forward is to liberalize the use of techs and find ways of providing better paying jobs and income security under the would-be new normal. And I use the word income security, we can debate about that, rather than job security, because in a world, in the new normal, where you have constant accelerating job destruction and job creation, it would not make sense, or it would make little sense to talk about job security, clinging on to current jobs. Next, please. What to do? As a start, government, we think, should stick to the initial strategy announced by Dolly, but keeping cost to employers low in order not to provoke disemployment. Resist outlawing or further curtailment of other forms of tax as advocated with the President's militant allies and the NDF. Then develop a truly win-win strategy for ending ENDO, building perhaps on DTI's proposed win-win solution. Third, the idea here is to find a package of regulatory reforms and policies that would, one, reduce regulatory risk and cost, promote investment in formal sector job expansion, and hand-in-hand demotivate Indo practices, or disincentivize, if you will. Next please. Here are some potential measures that we thought that could be part of this long-term win-win strategy. Lengthen the number of months for regularization, presently 6 months, but leave the number of months to be added to regional authorities, much the same way that the minimum wages are determined by regional boards. Then, the liberalization of this regularization rule can be targeted to certain enterprises and groups, for example, the new small-scale firms, as well as the group of disadvantaged workers. The second component is to change the requirements for receiving Social Security and other benefits. Now, worker must be a regular employee to be able to get these benefits. Instead, let's develop alternative requirements such as length of service and work performance in order to be regularized. Then, finally, reform the dispute resolution processes to speed it up and reduce the cost, hassles, and uncertainty associated with dismissal of workers and other labor issues. So, I now conclude with the following slide. Next. I want to end this because I want to plug in our forthcoming book, which is actually, it's about the unintended consequences about policies. And the title of the book is Unintended Consequences, the Folly of Uncritical Thinking. So you can infer for what I'm trying to imply here with respect to, rushing this ending of ENDO. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paqueo. We're now going through the reactors, and the first reactor is Dr. Jerry Sicat. Professor Sicat is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of the Philippines School of Economics. He was the first NEDA Director General and concurrently Minister of Economic Planning, and he founded the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Now, before we start looking for Dr. Sicat in the room, I've been told that he's actually not feeling well, and so I've been asked to read part of an article that he wrote precisely as a reaction to this particular study that Vic and Dave's produced. So permit me to read it verbatim. Contractualization has been a useful path towards the regularization of employment. Based on information gathered from the Philippine Labor Force Survey, Paqueo and Orbeta find that half of all temporary workers experiencing ENDO takes between 4 to 8 quarters or 1 year to 2 years to find regular employment. This is not a high figure given the length of time it takes to transition towards a regular job. But if ENDO is abolished, will it take an even longer time before frustration sets in and destroys the hope for the job seekers? I read this information as a reason not to discard elements of ENDO, even if the government were to seek ways to tighten labor regulations surrounding ENDO. There is danger that should ENDO be ended, the number of unemployables will find themselves mired in poverty. Incidentally, those who suffer this fate are mostly the less skilled and less educated, as we heard from the presentation. Workers with higher educational attainment have a faster route towards a more steady, regular job prospect. The main proponents of ending contractualization further are leaders of organized labor. They are employment insiders, those who have jobs. In addition, they seek to raise the minimum wage by 125 pesos per day across the board. This and the abolition of ENDO are likely to cause more unemployment. And that's the end of that piece of the article. So I'm going to go to the next reactor. That serves as Dr. Sikat's reaction to the presentation and to the work. The next reactor is Dr. Manny Esguerra. Professor Esguerra is currently a professor of economics at the University of the Philippine School of Economics. He was acting Socio-economic Planning Secretary and Director General at NEDA from Feb 1 to June 30, 2016. Prior to that, he was Deputy Director General of NEDA and Head of the National Development Office for Policy and Planning. Please welcome Dr. Esguerra for his comments.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here at the first Paderanga-Varela Memorial Lectures. And congratulations to FEF on the occasion of its 20th year. I've had the occasion to discuss this subject matter with Vic Paqueo and Babes Orbeta. And so it's quite difficult to stand here and just agree. Anyway, my comments are confined to some general propositions that they also state in their paper, and I've also benefited in a way from some data that I was able to gather after discussions with friends at the Department of Labor and Employment. The call to end contractualization is but a continuation of the opposition led by organized labor against the practice of employing workers on a non-regular basis. That is as contractuals, casuals, or temporary workers, whether they are hired directly or through an employment agency. Workers hired based on these contractual arrangements generally have shorter job tenures and do not enjoy the non-wage benefits granted to regular employees, because these labor contracts generally deviate from established notions of the employment relationship, which is widely interpreted as job security. They have been perceived as circumventions of various labor regulations, such as minimum wages, non-wage benefits, and other labor standards, including the rights of workers to unionize that increase labor costs. Costly regulation or not, I think there are real economic reasons for the variety of contractual arrangements observed in the Philippine labor market. Oliver Hart and Bengt Holmstrom, this year's recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work on contract theory, have explained the use of contracts in various settings to motivate people. As I had noted in a paper on flexible labor arrangements, I think almost 20 years ago, the question of whether to use a non-regular labor contract or a standard employment contract in the sense of an indefinite long-term relationship between worker and employer involves looking at a firm's multi-period demand for labor and the role of specific training, screening costs, and incentives in raising workforce productivity. The firm's external environment and its internal organization have to be considered too. The paper by Vic Paqueo and Aniceto Orbeta is correct to point out the economic reasons for the use of temporary employment contracts, or TECs. And I need not repeat them here. From their discussion, it ought to be clear that the contractual arrangements described would have emerged anyway as a result of the firm's optimizing behaviors given their specific circumstances. The regulatory environment could only have aggravated or attenuated the outcome. The call to end all contractualization coming from organized labor is, to say the least, both confused and confusing. The term contractual has a wide coverage and generally refers to those workers whose employment is fixed for a specific project or undertaking, the completion or termination of which has been determined at the time of employment. Although this matter has been subsequently clarified by stating which types of contractual arrangements in which industry or sector are excluded, for example, those that are project-based. Still, the issue of whether workers who perform functions that are seasonal or intermittent or not part of the core activities of firms, for example, waiters, security, janitorial, clerical, messengerial, ought to be regularized, remains to be settled. Here, the issue seems to be who takes on the responsibility of providing the workers the entitlements that regular workers normally get as part of their employment contract. Just for appreciation, according to Department of Labor and Employment figures for 2014, there are about 622,000 agency hired workers, 46% and 47% of which are in industry and services, respectively. Of those in industry, 86% are in manufacturing, while of those in services, 57% are in wholesale and retail trade, repair of vehicles and motorcycles, accommodation and food service activities, and financial and insurance activities. On the other hand, there are some 26,000 establishments engaging agency hired workers, 70% of which are in the services sector. Is the 622,000 agency hired workers the universe being referred to in the call to end all contractualization? Or are the casual hires, numbering about 208,000 included? Or is the call specific to ENDO? Unfortunately, no numbers are available with respect to workers covered by ENDO, nor on firms resorting to such practice. Do we then assume that all workers under temporary employment contracts are covered by ENDO, and therefore the target of regularization. This is important because the Department of Labor and Employment has committed to reduce contractualization by 50% this year, and then completely by next year. So what numbers are we exactly talking about? Maybe those numbers have been revised downwards after they were initially announced. I think that ENDO is basically a response to the regularization rule in the Philippines Labor Code, which substitutes the state's judgment for the firms on the question of when an employee should be regularized. As the paper argues, because firms and workers have different needs depending on their circumstances, the 6-month regularization rule limits their flexibility to work out a mutually beneficial arrangement. The optimal timing for firms to discover workers' abilities differs. As a result, firms terminate workers before completing 6 months to keep their flexibility, while workers who are terminated completely lose the chance to become regular workers. In this respect, the paper's empirical result, supporting the view that TECs provide a screening device that improves the chances of workers with less impressive credentials to eventually become regular workers, provides a strong argument for relaxing the regularization rule. I have some questions on the results of the estimation as well as the methodology, but we can leave that for another time. As a final point, I think that in the current context of globalization, rapid technological change, shorter product shelf lives, and the ensuing process of job destruction and creation, the risk of shocks facing both firms and workers has increased. This has increased the incentive for firms to resort to various contractual arrangements that provide greater latitude in the deployment of labor in order to survive. Fairness requires, however, that labor not be made to bear all the risk. In light of what seems to be an irreversible trend towards flexibility in labor markets, I think our energies are better spent thinking about mechanisms for risk sharing. And in this respect, work on publicly provided income support for the unemployed should be instructive. Such support can take various forms: unemployment insurance, unemployment assistance, severance pay, unemployment insurance savings accounts, and public works. However, the choice of which income support scheme is appropriate for the Philippines and its design will have to consider issues of client selection, work incentives, resource mobilization, institutional viability, administrative capacity, and a large heterogeneous informal sector. I think that ought to be a more productive area for future engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Esguerra. The next reactor is Professor Nieves Confesor, core faculty of the Asian Institute of Management, and her areas of teaching include strategic negotiations, conflict management, public policy, leadership and management of change, labor and employment, labor administration, and public sector governance. Professor Confesor served as the Secretary of Labor and Employment during the administration of President Corazon Aquino and the Presidential Advisor on Human Resource Development and International Labor Affairs in the administration of President Fidel Ramos. with the rank of Ambassador Extraordinary Plenipotentiary. She also served as advisor to several multilaterals, including ADB, ILO, ASEAN, and others. Please join me in welcoming Professor Contesor.
Thank you very much, Ron. I would rather that I came after the dome. Well, anyway, thank you very much. And welcome again and hello to Vic, who was part of my journey many years ago before he joined the World Bank, and he was a consultant to the Dole when we were growing up. About 5 years ago, I was in a dinner. We usually have dinners, good friends from those years, and these were the national labor leaders at the time in Cebu, so you know exactly where I was. And one of them said, you know, Nieves, we were so angry with you. So I said, oh, but we're such good friends. He says, yeah, but we were angry with you on the issue of contractualization. Because 25 years ago, we saw the terrain changing. We saw the export processing zones opening, and we were welcoming them. And I remember sitting down with a lot of the labor leaders and saying, there's something going on, and I must warn you, it is like an earthquake. We will have to look at new business models, the enterprises, and we will have to look at the new role of unions as well. We will also have to look at our labor code, which was about 10 years old at the time. This 10-year-old labor code was produced in 1974 by people who grew up in an import substitution policy which defended enterprises growing bigger and bigger using mass production technologies, and where unions grew and social security funds grew as a result of that model. And you can imagine what the mental models were, and I was so surprised that some of it is now part of our debate on contractualization. I was floored when the presidential contenders, all of them, said we must put an end to ENDO. And I said, oh my God, it's 25 years. At least my Cebuano national labor leaders, understood. Because that leader said, you know, we were angry with you. But 10 years after, we were having unions in the export processing zones. And what we knew, we understood what it means to do analog, and tomorrow somebody declares we are now digital. What do you do? And of course, we were also in a dinner in the huge building they had put together by the Japan Siemens Union. And perhaps one of the things we have not understood, and maybe that's why you will have anti-contractualization advocates in today's debate, not 25 years ago, is that a lot of our overseas workers, the models of arrangements or relationships is really contractualization. So you are really looking, and these labor leaders of mine who thought of me as their daughter or some young kid raising issues with them at that time said, actually, our own labor organization grew because we embraced this issue when we understood what it was. So new relationships have been put. Let me just say for my first point, since the labor code was passed in 74, the industrial landscape has so changed. The terrain has changed. It has thoroughly changed such that today we now have to understand enterprises as parts of supply chains, supply networks, where control over issues of labor are no longer in the hands of the enterprise, but in the hands of a set of enterprises aiming to compete in a global environment, and we, in the Philippines, are only parts of it. So we need to understand where we are talking about and what the anti-contractualization advocates need to understand as well. The volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity of this new century is actually challenging this labor code. But the new labor code, I say to everyone, good luck. Every Secretary of Labor aims to change the code. Every Labor Secretary sees what is going on, and yet it is a political issue. And that is why I say I like this debate on the ENDO. And thanks, Vic, for providing, as you have done so before, the analytics to understand it better. And not only on the effect only of one worker, 10 workers, but we need to understand a win-win proposal from the platform of what is best for everyone. And I like those. And that's why they say data analytics today, well, it's working in this area. The second point I make is what Secretary Esguerra has said. We look at contractualization, legislation of wages, etc. But perhaps the concern about contractualization is not about ensuring that workers get permanent employment and the benefits that go with it. It is not ensuring incomes or a job. And I like what Vic said. It is not job security anymore. Because you please define what is a job today. It can mean several jobs of the same category at any time. But it is really what we're looking at is risk sharing. ENDO is only one small issue, but I'm glad we're focusing on this because actually the win-win proposal of DTI and Dole actually is not just DTI and Dole. NEDA's got to come into it because the risk sharing will require new arrangements. The risk sharing will require new relationships. The risk sharing will require not only people in the local economy. It will require, because we have made a decision to go global, then it will require those categories. For many companies, including the small and medium-sized enterprises, and there's supposed to be about 90% of them, as well as the big ones as well, the buffer hypothesis that Paqueo describes might as well describe how enterprises today in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, they call it the VUCA world, may use techs to meet temporary surges in production activities or in consumption demand due to seasonal and cyclical factors as well as the shocks to the local and global economy. And the question I ask often is, how does one make an enterprise or enterprises, how do we make them braver, more courageous to take on this complexity and uncertainty? How do we make them less brave? And I look at this issue of ENDO, and I look at the issue, the fact that ENDO is only part of a set and intricate set of policies that were put together in another generation, but in mine as well. And so how do we make the workers also braver in terms of facing what we are facing? And Vic raises it, the fourth industrial revolution. The studies are indicating already the jobless growth that we were warned about by the ILO 25 years ago. It's not only more jobless growth, it is going to be real growth with very little jobs. And that's why I said perhaps it's also time to understand what is a job in our lifetime. The third I'd like to make is that there were some groups of companies, we would talk about this, and one group said they were social enterprises, and they said, but yes, a company should put it in their heads that they must be anti-poor. They must be pro-poor, pro-Philippines, and pro-green. And so in her company, she says, there is no such thing as ENDO, or even temporary. And she's doing very well, very well. And she says, my wages are way above the minimum wage. And so we do have models. You should look into it, because there are companies who will say, this is not an issue with us. And so I like this, because all of our discussions can be company-based or your economy. The other one I'd like to raise is the study that Vic mentions, and I suspect we would really want more studies. ECOP is here, PCCI is here. It's about satisfaction. Vic, that study was about 112 respondents between you and me. Yeah, that's a little shaky, to say the least, and to be kind. I would like to have a good survey, yeah, that tells us what that particular segment looks like. You want to talk about companies? When this was, I was in a dinner with former secretaries of labor, and we were talking ENDO. And one of them said, oh, but have you been to the shipyard somewhere outside Cebu? A good shipyard. 8,000 workers and only 500 are regular. So I said, well, nobody's complaining, isn't it? And their wages and incomes are really good. So these are some of the things that we need to bring up, from anecdotes to good surveys. Let me again point out some points, and this will be very fast. I agree that eliminating endo practices in the long run would require a reduction in the incentives underlying it. But by reforming the high costs of dismissals and disputes and the risks, the government could dramatically reduce without significantly undermining employment generation and inclusive growth, but you might lose your crown. Number two, like the period for apprenticeship, government may allow for different periods of probationary employment to give firms enough time to know their temps, not only in terms of skills, but also in terms of attitudes, and learning to learn skills for the workers, especially the new entrants to the workforce. The time necessary for building competency and work attitudes, with enterprises now taking up the training cost of the worker. Today, the employers are taking up less of the burden of training our workers. That's why Tesla has grown like hell from the time I was there. It's because government is assuming it. Yeah? In a sense, you take out your endo, and those last 2 years, what's going to happen is, who is going to bear the risk? Who is going to bear the task? And often I said, the employers need to take it on. So you see, for me, the employer should avoid endo, because it's a way of moving part of the training cost to employers as well. I don't agree with decentralizing to the regions, because the regional wage boards were made and put together by a set of parameters that are not the same as the endo. The uncertainty and volatility of the global and local economy requires a study not from the income, profit, etc. platform, but from the notion of risk, because it will be risk. The new normal of tax should reconstruct the workers' access to social security, income security, things like pag-ibig, PhilHealth, portability, which we have been talking about before, must now be considered in the area of contractualization. The current one-size-fits-all regularization policy makes it costly, and we will need to rethink, and I suspect the DOLE might wish to start the discussions on it. What then does government do at the policy level? I guess that's been given out. How do we enable both enterprises and workers to cope and embrace this uncertain world, now going more than less, shouldn't we start to experiment or study the experiments done by some of these companies that I have mentioned, and as well as the other parts of this world, on how temporary employment can serve as the buffers and the filters? At the same time, shouldn't we be renegotiating the relationships of government, private sector, and workers, and the organizations of organized labor under this new normal? An example I had given earlier is who should train the workers? Who should subsidize the training? We have just added K-12. After K-12, who will pick it up? Or who can cost the training of the worker? What funds should be built that enable workers and enterprises to handle the shocks from the local and global economy? Who should bear the cost of regularization? Are there incentives for enterprises to regularize, including the unraveling of this interweb of worker protection, of which ENDO is a part, and of which I suspect belongs to another century? Shouldn't we incentivize the hiring of temporary regular employment by providing, for government to provide excellent facilitation of employment services, it being the matcher of demand and supply, and help out enterprises and workers to find each other much faster? And if they cannot access such services, can the tax be allowed to allow better matching between workers and employers, to provide employers more time and space to consider disadvantaged applicants, and also for the workers to bring up their credentials and their training such that a regular job may be something that is sooner than later? Can tax be used, and are tax being used today by workers for the missing 2 years before the K-12? And so let me leave it at that, because I would like to leave. I think the issue of the contractualization and this issue of ENDO raises more questions, and I suspect the answers, I am very hesitant when one has ready answers for it, because the answers we have actually grew out of another century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nieves. Just struck me that I was also being crafted during those days in the 1970s. So the labor code is quite senior. The next reactor is Attorney Raul Angeles. Attorney Angeles is currently the BOI Executive Director for the Investments Assistance Center under the DTI. He is also the official representative of the BOI to the Subcommittee on Philippine-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, the JEPA, Subcommittee on Improvement of Business Environment, and official representative of DTI to the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority Board, Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority Board, and Livelihood Corporation Board. Please join me in welcoming Attorney Angeles.
Thank you very much. Pleasant good afternoon. Allow me to read the DTI's reaction to the paper of Dr. Paqueo and Dr. Orbeta. The paper attempts to objectively analyze the issue of ending contractualization with policy recommendations, which may be considered to improve countries' labor regulations and programs. It's written from an economist point of view, supported by statistical data and established facts. The paper analyzes the government's plan to tighten and reduce, if not prohibit, temporary employment contracts and job outsourcing. But we would like to relate to this from the DTI on how we would like to address the issue on removing contractualization by proposing the win-win structure. It seeks to balance the legitimate business interests and employees' rights to security of tenure and self-organization. Before we discuss the comments on the position paper, we would like to provide an overview of the labor laws and the DTI's measures to address contractualization. As mentioned, Labor Code was enacted in 1974 and provides the governing law of employees in the private sector, and it protects labor, promote employment and human resources development, and ensure industrial peace based on social justice. The employees' rights are also guaranteed under the 1987 Constitution. But despite these guarantees, there are still some violations, or the workers do not enjoy these rights. With this reality, the DTI recognizes the importance of formulating measures in accordance with emerging business trends driven by new economic forces like advanced technology, high-speed communication services, new forms of global and domestic governance, regional integrations, and others. Determining a workable balance between job security and flexibility, between management prerogative and workers' rights, between business viability and the workers' welfare. The department also recognizes the pressing need to address the problem of circumvention of the law on security of tenure being committed by employers. We believe that the issue on contractualization will be better addressed through a series of consultations with various stakeholders, which includes the labor, management, public and private sector, with the end in view of enforcing employees' rights and benefits which are provided under the Labor Code. The DTI, in cooperation with the Department of Labor, initiated discussion with this issue. And we consulted the business leaders, the labor sector, and had a tripartite meeting. And the objective here is to get some consensus on how to proceed with this issue on contractualization. We have noted the following observation of the study, as supported by statistical data, that compared to ASEAN countries, the Philippine labor market are inefficient. Temporary employment contracts and job outsourcing play a valuable role in keeping the economy efficient, competitive, and inclusive. In the current one-size-fits-all regularization policy makes it more costly and difficult for terms to become permanent. On the other hand, we have observed that the ENDO can be viewed as, while we observe that ENDO practice can be viewed as coping mechanism, we do not support this practice because it's illegal under the law, under the Labor Code, under the Department Order 18-A. The observation that ENDO appears to be overblown may not be totally accurate. Based on the data presented in the 2014 survey data, it suggests that 95% of workers employed by ENDO contractors appear satisfied with the current jobs because the SSS, the field health, and other mandated contributions are being paid by the employers. But as mentioned, there is some room for improvement because the LEV credits, the separation pay, and the retirement benefits, the satisfaction rating are very low. And the right to security of tenure and self-organization are extremely low at 9.1 and 3% respectively. From the survey data presented, it can be observed that while statutorily mandated benefits such as SSS, Pag-ibig, and fuel are paid, the constitutionally guaranteed rights of security of tenure and right to self-organization and collective bargaining may not have been enjoyed by the workers, as evidenced by the low satisfaction. Perhaps these are the main reasons why labor organizations are totally against contractualization and endo practices, because according to them, it undermines the workers' rights, security of tenure. It gives workers entitlement to all labor benefits, which includes the payment of minimum wage, that overtime pay, 13-month pay, leave credits, and others. Moreover, endo practice may have prevented workers and employees to form, join, or assist unions or organizations or associations for purposes of collective bargaining. As noted, there is a very low satisfaction rating among those surveyed. Now, balancing the legitimate business interests of the employers and the rights of the laborers, security of tenure, and self-organization, the proposed win-win structure of the Department of Trade and Industry provides for the following. Workers are hired by the service providers. They become regular after 6 months. And they have to be entitled to the mandated benefits. And when a contract is finished and they cannot no longer be placed in other employers, they have to be given separation benefits or retirement benefits by the service provider. In the paper, it was mentioned that there are some resistance to this win-win structure because of the added cost, which was estimated to be around 30 to 40%. But this is, I think, not the majority sentiment of the business leaders that we consulted. Maybe there are some. And we have also computed that the added cost would not go to that magnitude, because the separation pay and retirement pay would just be about 1/2 month or 15 days, plus the service incentive leave of 5 days, plus the 13-month pay of 2.5 days. And what we calculated that this is around 7 to 8% added cost from the current charge of 10 to 12% administrative charge by the service provider. So that would be total to 17 or 19%, not 30 to 40%. Both the management and the workers have constitutional guaranteed, as previously mentioned, and we have also noted the recommendations, the measures that has to be considered. One is to lengthen probationary period. Jurisprudence, Supreme Court said that 18 months for those GTE Yellow Pages workers, the probationary period, and also for teachers it's 3 years. So perhaps this is worth considering. The decentralization to the regions, which was mentioned a while ago. But I think the most important is to form the legal basis for employment on separation and dismissal, because this is the biggest incentive for companies to hire contractuals. As mentioned in the paper, there was a case that was finished in 20 years, and Supreme Court ordered payment of 200 million back wages. That's totally unacceptable to businessmen. After 20 years, you will be ordered 200 million. And there are so many jurisprudence that would support a very lengthy process from the labor arbiter to the NLRC to the Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court. And perhaps there should be some form of streamlining and reform in this area. Because if the employer has the flexibility to hire and fire in just pay the benefits after firing and without going through these cases, the tedious and long cases, then perhaps baka wala nang mag-contractual because they will also be paying for trainings. The training who will bear the burden of training. Usually it's the employer. Now, TESDA has some national certification programs, but these are because these are required abroad. So we support. We are open to the idea of, as mentioned by the Secretary Professor. It's not only DOL and DTI that should be involved in this. All other sectors should contribute to this because there is a new ball game that's the reality. And at present, we are cooperating with the Department of Labor to enforce the DO-19 and DO-18-A. In fact, we have met with our BI registered firms and all other investment promotion agencies like Subic, Clark, PEZA, to encourage them to at least voluntarily comply with all these mandated benefits. So with that, I'd like to thank you your invitation for us to contribute in this debate on contractualization. Thank you and good afternoon.
The next reactor is Mr. Alex Avila, currently Assistant Secretary at the Department of Labor and Employment. He assists the Undersecretary for Employment and Policy Support Cluster. Previously, he was the OIC Executive Director of the National Wages and Productivity Commission. He also became Regional Director of DOLE National Capital Region and DOLE Region 4A. And in 2010, Mr. Avila was a recipient of a presidential citation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Avila.
Thank you. A pleasant afternoon to all. On behalf of the Department of Labor and Employment, I wish to thank the Foundation for Economic Freedom for this opportunity for interaction. I also congratulate Dr. Vicente Paqueo and Dr. Aniceto Orbeta for their timely and insightful paper on one of the most controversial issues confronting our society today, ENDO. We welcome the insights and perspectives the paper has raised and put forward, which can serve as useful reference and inputs to the ongoing review of Department Order Number 18-A, or the rules and regulations implementing Articles 106 to 109 of the 42-year-old Labor Code. I am not about to give specific comments on the points raised in the paper. Rather, I would like to frame our general comments within the context of how the DOLE plans to help achieve the President's goal to bring our country closer to the overall vision of achieving lasting peace, inclusive development, prosperity, and social justice for all Filipino women and men, wherever they are. It is for this reason that we have crafted an 8-point labor and employment agenda grounded on our basic mandate as an institution: to promote employment and human resource development, to ensure workers' protection and welfare, and to promote a sound, stable, and dynamic industrial peace as a shared responsibility of our social partners and the workers and employer sectors. It is the third item in our agenda that actually covers the issue of contractualization and ENDO. Incidentally, terms that cannot be found in the Labor Code. This agenda is about ensuring full respect of labor standards and the fundamental principles and rights at work. We say that we are dole because we are bound to protect and respect all rights at work as a precondition for promoting and sustaining decent work. Under the principle of industry self-regulation and good corporate citizenship, we also expect employers to do the same. But even as we advocate for voluntary compliance, general labor standards and occupational safety and health standards should always be understood and implemented for what they are. That is, as minimum standards and basic rights. Therefore, inspection will remain to be our main program in enforcing these rights, with compliance as its outcome. Thus, our policy will be to strictly enforce and never to compromise or undermine standards and rights. We know that the most cherished labor right among our workers is security of tenure. Enjoyment of this right is now seen to be deeply eroded by the phenomenon we call contractualization, or the use of short-term contracts instead of regular employment contracts, even for work that are necessary and desirable to the business of the employer, for the purpose of circumventing security of tenure and other labor standards. As the paper pointed out, the DOLE has committed to end ENDO pursuant to the directive of the President to put a stop to this pernicious practice. Former Secretary Esguerra was asking the universe a while ago in his comment, what does the DOLE mean by ending ENDO by 50% by end of this year and all ENDO practices by end of 2017? This is actually a number in progress. We don't have the actual numbers right now. We have administrative data on contractors and subcontractors based on their registration with under Department Order number 18-A. But not all contractors and subcontractors have been subjected to inspections. And while they are required to submit reportable requirements on a semestral basis, most of them do not comply. So we will know the universe, we will know the actual extent of ENDO as we inspect the establishments and the contractors and the subcontractors. Because we are not only looking into ENDO as a result of trilateral arrangements, but as well illegitimate forms of contracting as a result of bilateral practices of employers, direct hiring. We consider standards on security of tenure as an issue primarily involving workers' protection, in much the same way as general labor standards and OSCE standards. That's why our Bureau of Working Conditions and the regional offices which administer and implement our labor inspection system are under strict directive to see to it that the law is strictly and equitably implemented. Strict enforcement of labor laws and standards represents the first track of our three-pronged strategy to end ENDO. The second track, and as mentioned in the paper, is the review of existing rules and regulations governing contracting out of work and those related to security of tenure, in consultation with all stakeholders. Since July, we have been holding dialogues and consultations on this issue with workers and employers groups, as well as government agencies, in particular DTI, and other stakeholders like the academy. Our end goal here is to craft a set of rules and regulations that are more holistic in orientation and at the same time more easily implementable and enforceable. The third track is the review and possible amendment of existing legislation. As of our last count, 23 bills have already been filed in Congress seeking amendments to the labor code provisions on security of tenure and contracting. We have participated in several hearings on these bills and continue to provide technical inputs to the committees on labor and employment in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Some of these bills actually seek the total prohibition of contracting in all its forms. And the other day, last Monday, the DOLE organized or held a labor summit participated in by more than 300 labor leaders, and they put forward a unified position that all forms of contractualization must go. That is the unified position. Of course, they also clamored for across-the-board wage increase and several amounts, and called actually for the abolition of the regional wage boards. Finally, as our response to the 4 measures the paper has put forward as part of a holistic strategy that would complement effective enforcement of relevant labor regulations, we will pursue responsive, enabling, and equitable labor policies, laws, and regulations. Our role as an institution goes beyond simply enforcing labor laws in a way that the rights of one party cancels out the rights of the other. Rather, the DOLE should be guided by 3 principles. And I hope this resonates with some of the points raised in the paper. First, we should always stand for balance in employee-employer relationship. Second, we should always support the creation of decent work opportunities, knowing full well that to make rights at work effective in law and in practice, there must first of all be decent work. We told the labor sector that it might be useless to talk of standards and rights if we have no jobs. But of course, we want decent work. We want decent jobs. And third, to make the first 2 principles realizable, we have to recognize and nurture the right of employers to reasonable returns on investments and to expansion and growth. I think this is also a constitutional right. With these principles in mind, the DOLE should be ready to discharge its functions as an enabler for work creation and protector of workers' rights. Thank you very much for this opportunity and for your attention.
Okay, so we're running a little late and some of you have taken matters into your own hands already. I assume that there may be some reactions, comments in an open forum section, or would you like to just skip this? Okay, so there will be at least one. Let's entertain 2, and then let's give the final chance for Vic to react to everything and then close.
As I see it, as I see it, there are 2 problems. As I see it, there are 2 problems. One is security of tenure, and the other is contractualization. Contractualization is entered into because for the first 6 months you don't have to pay all the benefits necessary once you make someone permanent. And at the end of 6 months you become permanent, and it becomes extremely difficult to get rid of the employees, regardless of their performance or non-performance. So you've got 2 problems that can be easily solved by 2 solutions. First solution is all benefits, including retirement, Phil health, everything else, pay from day 1, not after 6 months. And anybody who leaves after, say, 5 months, you get 5 months pro rata of all those benefits. If you do that from day 1, there's no reason to worry about getting to the 6th month. And then get rid of security of tenure. Security of tenure is not good for the employee, and it is certainly not good for the business. All security of tenure does is ensure
incompetence of the worker. If you get rid of security of tenure, what happens is that the worker works hard to keep his job. If he doesn't work hard, you get rid of him. And what happens? You hire somebody else. There has been no loss of job. There has been a change of the person, but no loss of job. What happens then? The person who got the job works hard so he won't lose the job. The person who lost his job when he does get a job works hard so he won't lose it a second time. What happens then? Productivity goes up. What happens then? The Philippines becomes more competitive in the world. What happens then? Investment comes in because we have flexible labour that will meet what you need as a manager. No sensible manager, or even unsensible manager, gets rid of a person for no reason. It's hard to hire people. It's hard to find people to get a job. If you need someone to do a job, you keep them if you possibly can. So I don't know what all this conversation's about, quite frankly. If you do the two things I suggest about, no security of tenure, all benefits from day one, you don't worry about contractualization, you don't worry about whether it's a project, you don't worry about whether it's full-time, it's all done by the market. Could someone please explain to me why this isn't solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Let's take another reaction and then give the mic to Vic. Maybe two, Rami and our colleague.
Just a question. I understand there are 600,000 government temporary contract workers. How does that get affected by this new policy?
Sounds to me like a question for Dole. What happens to the 600,000 employees of government? Can you please give a mic to our colleague?
Thank you. My name is Tomo Yamadala, ADB. I was quite surprised to see the table 6. You know, the unregular workers are still much satisfied with the current position. And I think if this figure is true, the prescription, the solution may be very much different. If they are satisfied with the current situation, so which means that they are expecting the increase in minimum wage. And the continuous minimum wage is their expectation or regularization in the future. So they have a very high prospect. That's why they have a very high satisfaction. And the government needs to ensure the increase of minimum wage along with the economic development, the GDP growth. And that's the solution. The point is, if this figure is true, we have to go back to the question of a high unemployment rate, also the sort of social disparity. The high unemployment rate can be reduced by giving more job opportunity. So which means the government should more focus on the job opportunity rather than regularization. And if the income disparity is the issue, probably due to the disparity in the holding asset. So the social disparity is not due to the distribution, but the asset. So the solution could be capital gain tax or inheritance tax, or some other way on the tax on the capital. So I'm very much curious, this survey is a true representation or not. Otherwise, the solution could be totally different. Another point is the commentator mentioned who will bear the risk. Actually, the point is the government or employer or employees, or in other words, individual, who bears the cost of labor market adjustment. And Europe bear the cost by the government, but they couldn't maintain it, so they changed the labor market. Japan used to put the burden on the companies, but now the unregular workers' share is about 30% or over 30%. So no more so-called Japanese labor tradition. So the question of who bears the cost, very much depending on the context in the Philippines, in each country. And it's the question, what sort of a risk sharing or arrangement is desirable? To me, the Philippines is still a young country. The government can bear more sort of a cost. But they have to spend wisely, more training, how to increase the productivity. The third point that I'd like to highlight is actually the issue which is lacking is the equal wage for equal work or same work. If regular worker, his productivity is higher than part-time worker, it is justifiable. But the question is, if they're doing the same thing, is it fair to put the situation that the part-time worker is paid less? So this is another dimension which has not been discussed today. So those are 3 comments that I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to our government colleagues and then turn over the mic to Vic, the 600,000.
About 1 year ago, I attended a committee hearing chaired by Senator Trillanes and several bills on regularizing this number of workers were discussed. The position of the DBM actually is not to automatic regularization because the Secretary Jokno was saying that it actually runs counter to the idea of meritocracy in government. The CSC also has the same position. And on the part of the DOLE, I think this is much of concern more of the CSC and of course DBM. But during the Labor Summit last Monday, the labor sector also touched on this issue. They want, of course, they want that these workers also be regularized and limit the hiring of job orders in the government sector. I think that is how I can contribute to the discussion.
Okay, so Vic, you have the final thoughts. Please keep it short in the interest of the rest of our colleagues getting their dinner.
Yeah, those were really good questions. And I think if only for that, I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which is to provoke a more critical discussion of this anti-contractualization movement. I can call them movement. Let me start with the last one, the last question. I think that the table that you are referring to, as correctly pointed out by Nieves, is very limited in terms of the sample size and coverage. And therefore, there's no claim to its representativeness for the country or even for the zone ever. But the reason I presented that is precisely to provoke DOLE to produce the data to show how serious the problem is and where the problem lies. So hopefully, and also that before rushing into figuring out how to respond to the demands of the anti-contractualization movement, I think it is good policy to base it on good information. How bears the cost of labor market adjustments? What sharing arrangement is desirable? I think this is also a very topical issue to think about, but particularly as I have been kind of promoting, to think ahead, because there is we can already more or less see the dawning of the fourth industrial revolution, in which basically we are going to have all kinds of shifts and job destructions, job creation. So people will have to be moving around and adjusting. But the question of, or the desire for social stability to have some kind of risk-sharing arrangements is there. So otherwise, if you don't address that, you are going to have trouble. Just like the US, for example, is having trouble now in terms of the pushback against globalization and trade. Now, having said that, I just want to put on the table in terms of who shall bear the burden. I would imagine that it would have to be the workers, some, the employers, some, and I would say the government, some, because if what is at stake here is social cohesiveness and social stability, that is a public good, and the government's function in terms of its financing and how to use its money is essentially to finance public goods. So it must share in the burden. Equal wage for regular versus temporary firms. I think that probably if you take into account that the characteristics of regular workers, they are like, say, for example, more highly educated, would immediately say that it cannot be equal compared to those which have low education, which presumably they have differences in productivity, etc. And there is also another, if I would refer you to the discussion, because otherwise it will take too long. The Pacini paper actually discusses why at the beginning they may be really in terms of their real talents and maybe they are the same, the regular and those without credentials who lands in temporary work, but that is unobservable. But as they become temporarily employed, they can actually show their real output, then they will catch up. All other things being equal, therefore, they will move towards closer to close the gap over time. But if you then remove that platform, that pathway for those with less credentials to become employed, then you are removing the chance, the opportunity for them to show what they really can do. What else? I think, Peter, I'm very sympathetic with your position, although I'm not too sure whether that is politically feasible. So the question there is, how do you kind of craft it in a way that makes it politically doable? That's it.
Thank you very much, Vic. Please join me in thanking Dr. Vic Paqueo as the inaugural speaker for the Varela Paderanga Lecture. Please also join me in thanking members of the Varela and Paderanga family for spending the night with us. And I was instructed now that without further ado, one can go and line up for dinner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron, for moderating. Now, to formally close today's event, we would like to call our chairperson of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, Sir Bobby Biocampo. Sir Bobby? Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. I feel a little bit incompetent at this point to do closing remarks for two reasons. First is I had just arrived from abroad the previous night, and
Second is I was late to come to this session. I was at a board meeting, so unfortunately I didn't hear most of it. Nevertheless, I'd like to take note that this inaugural lecture is in honor of two people that were not only members of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, but were exemplars of the type of people in government service that we hope we would have more of. I knew both Paderanga and Varela personally and worked with them closely. And both of them exuded a kind of competence, professionalism, technocracy, honesty, non-corruption, and so forth, and a focus on some of the things that this organization stands for, particularly the continuous reminder to all our political and other leaders that the core principle for our being able to move towards real progress is the maintenance of our focus on the principles of economic freedom. Part of that, of course, was dealt upon today by our honored speaker, Vicente Paqueo, who is addressing an issue that seems to be very much on this particular government's minds. And it also is an example of the continued effort of the Foundation for Economic Freedom to highlight analytical opinion on subject matters that are of great importance to the progress of the country's economy. So thank you very much, Mr. Paqueo, for your presentation. And as a token of appreciation from the FEF, may I present you this plaque of appreciation, which reads as follows. This plaque of appreciation is hereby presented to Vicente C. Paqueo, PhD, for presenting his co-authored study with Aniceto Orbeta, Jr., PhD, entitled Beware of the End of Contractualization! Exclamation point, battle cry. During the Paderanga Memorial Lecture, would ending ENDO and outlawing other TECs contribute to inclusive economic growth? Held on the 19th day of October 2016 at the Manila Golf and Country Club, Makati City, signed by Toti Chiclanco as president and myself as chairman. Dr. Paqueo, thank you very much. Thank you. So thank you. That goes this lecture, and I guess we move on to part 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Bobby. You're, in fact, all invited to join us in the FEF Social Night. So if you want to see Bobby and Raul rock the night away, we suggest you stay behind and watch. So thank you once again for joining us. Snacks, sir, at the back. So please help yourself. Thank you. Oh yeah, we also have a photo group on our left side. So anyone who's interested to have a member for tonight, please just go over to the left. Thank you.